So we just finished talking to Michael Wolfe, which is the episode that you're about to hear. It was incredibly fun. I had such a good time talking to him. Michael is most recently the co-founder of Gladly, but he's founded over 5 companies, incredibly successful. I love his Substack. It's like one of the few ones that actually has substance and isn't just bluster, which a lot of them are, especially the ones that are giving founders advice. We talked mostly about the importance of talking to your customers and understanding not only that you should do that, but how to do that. The how is really, really crucial. The second part is, talking about founder mode. Like, what is founder mode? When should a founder step in? When should an executive step in? Just an overall awesome conversation, and one that definitely has to have a too. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking. Here is Michael Wolfe.
I'm Ibby Syed.
I'm Sean Collins.
And this is Numbers and Narratives.
All right, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. Before we get started, I've obviously followed your writing for a while, but would love for an intro from your perspective for the folks that are listening.
Yeah, let me. I'll give a little bit of my background. So I'm mostly a founder. I have been either a founder or the first employee at 5 B2B startups in a row, going all the way back to 1994, which for me was only a few years out of college. My timing was really lucky. I came out of college kind of right at the perfect timing in terms of getting swept up in the dot-com bubble like so many people did at the time. And all my companies have been some form of B2B software, CRM, customer service, web analytics, a security company, mostly mid to large enterprise. So mostly have an idea, talk to a bunch of customers, get feedback, raise money, build the team, and just kind of struggle through trying to turn that into a real company. One of my companies that I joined really early, went public back during the dot-com bubble, called Kana, which was a customer service software company. I co-founded Vonto in 2003 with Joseph Ancinelli, Kevin Roney. At the time, I was a entrepreneur in residence at Benchmark, and Benchmark has funded 3 of my companies, and I was an entrepreneur in residence there twice. That company went on to a big acquisition by Symantec. I spent a few years at Symantec. That was probably my best big company experience in terms of looking at M&A, bringing in an acquired company and going and acquiring some more companies. Then my last company was Gladly, which is a customer service software company. I co-founded Gladly in 2014 with Joseph Ancinelli and Dirk Kessler, who I had worked with at the previous company. We incubated that company at Greylock because Greylock has a really good track record of having their partners kind of spawn and come up with company ideas and launch them out of Greylock. And that was about a 10-year journey. Company's doing great. We made a very successful pivot to adding AI into the product suite a couple years ago, which is going awesome. I left Gladly a few months ago because I'm at the stage in my career now where I want to spend more time working with other founders. My kids are in college now, so trying to kind of do more travel, take a little time off. So I'm doing more things like this and looking for more opportunities, both to write about startups, which I do on my Substack, which is nextfounder.co, and also doing a lot more kind of advisory boards, consulting, a couple boards, like more of those kinds of things.
Nice. One of the questions that I had is, look, like we're young. Sean and I think Sean works for Conterra. He helps us run marketing. We're I don't know. I see a lot of problems that early stage founders run into when they're starting to build a company. What is kind of the most common piece of advice that you usually give people? Like, well, what is some advice that you give founders that are trying to build a product?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, obviously every company is different. The whole point of what we do here is that there's no like what works for one company might not work for another. But you do tend to see, I would say companies tend to at least rhyme in terms of the top challenges or the top patterns that you tend to see. And I would say almost every company I've ever worked with, including mine at different phases, they get to a day where people aren't buying the product. They've built a little bit of a pipeline, built an early product. They just are always like getting those first 5 or 10 customers is a real struggle. And in some cases, you're on the right track. You just have to brute force, really just keep working on building pipeline, keep working on finding the right customers. But usually it's the it's a more serious problem, which is you had an idea, you are so sure that it's a good idea. You just know that if only you could raise some money, get in front of some customers, build the product, it's going to fly off the shelves. It almost never does, either because you got the features wrong, got the messaging wrong, got how you pitch it to customers wrong, or you might be even more off base in terms of just you're in a market that's not going to be a market, or at least not in the way you visualize it. And then you have to rewind, and it's either a pivot or you have to shut the company down. And almost that can almost always be avoided by asking better questions earlier around, yes, we think our idea is great. How do we validate it? How do we get in front of enough customers? How do we ask the right questions? How do we push our initial vision a little in terms of we have a point of view and we want to validate if that point of view is right? But on the other hand, your job is not to twist customers' arms and convince them that you're right.
Yeah.
It is to really truly listen and be open to the possibility you might be 5 degrees off, you might be 90 degrees off in terms of what the real opportunity is in the area you're looking.
And the best way of doing that is to just talk to people. I guess if I were to ask, I mean, I'm a visual learner, Sean. I know we are both examples peoples. Like you just told us it, right? Like you founded 5 companies. If you were to kind of go back and do one of them over again, or maybe you have mythical sixth company, right? Like, what is the kind of process that you'd follow? Like, you've met your co-founder, you have an idea, you know what you want to work on. I don't know, maybe you could pick customer service software, a completely new vertical. But what process would you follow? Because I think that the reason I asked this question and the reason I'm putting you on the spot here is every single like most of the YC talks, like they go over this exact statement, right? They're like, you have to talk to your customers. You have to like, yeah, but it's actually like when you get into the zone of building a product or trying to have conversations, like most people that I at least I talked to when I was an investor, they never built a company before, and actually most of them came because I don't know, mine was in data and software. They were mainly product or engineering people, and so they didn't have that kind of like sales muscle built up yet. So, like, how can you talk to us a little bit more about how you run this process if you were a team of two?
Yeah, and there's there's a million, the entire books have been written about this topic. Like there's lots of things to think about. I think that let me first acknowledge that what we're talking about is not, everybody knows that this is the challenge. And you're reminded by, Y Combinator and, I remember Lean Startup and 4 Steps of the Epiphany, like all the content and all the, every program gives, every founder hears that advice. So I think it's maybe a little more interesting to ask, even with every founder kind of having that background, why doesn't it actually happen? And I think part of it probably comes down to founders do tend to be more technical. They do want to, and their comfort zone is more in the building as opposed to getting in front of customers. Now, I think, again, they know that, but I think what they do, they kind of do the minimum. They'll get in front of 5 customers. They'll say, do you think our stuff is great or not? And 4 of them will say, yeah, looks okay. And of course, the 4 are probably friends of theirs or it's
Yeah,
just somebody
the
trying to
mom
get off the
test,
phone. Yeah, it's a
the
mom
mom
test.
test, the mom test.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then they kind of check the validation box, then they continue to build. And I think a lot of that is they see it as validation. In fact, I shouldn't even use the word validation because validation implies that you have a thesis, you just need to prove that thesis is right. So you tend to get in front of people and say, like, am I right? Am I right? Am I right? If enough people say, yeah, you're right, you kind of you check the validation box and move forward. But validation, if you use the term validation, you already have really kind of minimized the surface area of the questions you're going to ask, or you're not truly curious about what opportunities lie in kind of the zip code of this area that we're building. You instead want them that you're looking for a yes. And if you go into it trying to find a yes, you're going to quit as soon as you get a couple yeses. And I've made that mistake in a couple companies too, where you treat validation as just a checkbox item, not as truly a process of let's go in and discover not only what's right and wrong with our starting point, kind of our initial idea, let's look a little more broadly at, are there other ways to approach the problem? Is our ICP, our initial customer profile, is that a little different than where we started? Is there maybe an even better idea? Like in chess, for example, they say if you find a good idea, if you find a good move, don't take it. You should pause and look for a great move. And a lot of founders, they have that problem. They kind of pick a local maximum, something that's getting lukewarm feedback, where if they had cast a wider net, asked better questions, and been more open to responses, they may have found something even better.
I've been on kind of both sides of that, of doing it. Well, I've done it wrong myself, and I've been on the interviewee side and been like, why are you, I guess, apparently to someone who did it very well, right? It's like, I remember one call in particular where someone was like, I want to ask you and interview you about this kind of topic from, I'm starting a startup. And I kept being like, why are you asking me this stuff? Like, let's talk about your product so I can give you feedback on this product. And he's like, no, I just want to hear about your day and your problems. And I was like, stop. You get asked for an hour of my time to talk about your startup. Like, stop asking me. And I everything you just described about not doing enough interviews, I've done that. Not if going in with like I'm almost more like I'm trying to not sell, but like be 1 degree away from selling, as opposed to truly coming in and being like, I just want to understand everything about your problem and figure out if I'm looking at the right tree even. Yeah, I don't know. I screwed that up a lot.
There was I used to think that the right way to do this is you build like a mock-up or a demo, some like a high fidelity version of your product. Then you go and show it to everybody and see what they say. And that works at a certain stage. But then I got the advice once that I've been following ever since, which is don't show people your product. Like the first step of product discovery is don't show people your product. At least don't show it right away. Don't go into the meeting and say, we're going to talk about my product. Instead, you're taking a step back and asking about what problems they have. Have they looked for solutions? Have they built internal homegrown solutions to solve that problem? Have they been pitched solutions by other vendors? And then maybe only in the second half of the meeting, you start to kind of lay out your own thinking and say, here's some of the things we're working on. Here's what we've heard from other customers. Let me show you a demo or some screenshots or some artifacts you can respond to. But if you introduce that really early in the meeting, then you've completely constrained the kind of avenue or the landscape of things you can talk about. And the customer will say, that thing looks great. I hate to criticize it because, that has pretty colors, whatever. So then they suddenly are only giving you micro reactions to what's in front of them. And it can, and you're right, it can be a little frustrating because people are asking these wide ranging questions and you're like, I just want to know what you guys do. But that's part of the art of doing this.
Yeah, it makes so much sense when you say it that way, right? Like, I hadn't even thought about tell me about the tools you're using now to accomplish or solve this problem, right? And if you think about it from what are all the things I'm going to want to check off and be ready to go with to successfully go to market, it's understanding who your competitors are, understanding how you position against them and kind of what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so you're actually not just focused the conversation on, is my product good enough to try and build, but you're using this as a fuel to figure out your whole go-to-market motion then too.
There's a thing that happens, every startup I've worked, and this is a little bit old school, this is probably more true in the past than it is today. At some point you have some success and you hire a head of marketing, and that head of marketing says, we're going to write down our ICP, we're going to write down our positioning, we're going to write down our messaging, we're going to kind of do the marketing 101, we're going to kind of build it from a foundation. And what I've realized recently, and I've done a lot more mentoring of founders the last couple of years, is that stuff you almost need from day one. Meaning ICP, who is your customer? How big are they? What industries? Who are the buyers? How do those buyers spend their time? Really having a point of view of that. The positioning, which is what problems are you solving for them? What will those customers compare you to in their mind? Is it something they're already looking at, problems they're trying to solve? And then messaging, which is what are the words you use to describe all that? I used to think that was a big company thing. That was kind of like getting from 5 million to 100 million. But when a company can't talk about what they're doing, they can't say, who's it for? What problems do we solve? Why are we different? Why are we better? That hurts you from day one because you might not even be talking to the right customers, might not even be asking the right questions. So when I work with companies, I them to pitch that stuff to me. And if they're not super clear, either on the answer or at least the things they're testing, maybe they have a few different hypotheses and they're testing all of them. I say, well, you're probably too broad and and the problem is almost always that they want to be able to sell to everybody and don't want to focus, which is a whole nother topic we can go down, we can talk about.
Yeah. We could definitely talk about that one for a while.
This is so funny. Sean,
sort of
this like
the-
goes back to, well, this goes back to like how Sean and I met. Like it was like we were selling like a marketing product, like a retention one that was like designed to help people understand which customers were going to churn. And like it was like definitely something he was excited about, but it wasn't like the number one problem, right? So like that one was interesting because I don't necessarily know if we did it the best way, like the discovery side of it. We didn't do it the best way, but then like what ends up happening is you ship the product and you very, very quickly, because like it gives you the short feedback loop, right? Like if you talk to a customer and they say, hey, I want this, or I like, this is maybe interesting. The next stage that you want to do is, okay, now I have to time box myself. Now I have to get this person something quickly so I'm actually solving their problem. And you build whatever the hackiest solution possible is to actually just get them an answer. And then you can test out whether or not they end up using it, right? Like, is this an actual problem that my customer faces to the point where they're living and breathing it? Which, yeah. That's super, super interesting. How does this change? How does this change for a company of like, because I know most of our customers by name, right? Like I've had at least one conversation with them, if not multiple. I sit in on regular meetings. I watch the meeting recordings if I can't make it. But how does that work? I mean, you've done multiple companies start to exit. How does this change as you grow, right? Like when you figure out who you are, you figure out who you market to. When it comes to sort of the quote unquote optimization part of it, what's the best route to understand what you have to build next, right? What problems do I have to fix? There's an endless backlog of features to build and problems to solve and bugs to fix. How do you better understand what you need to build and not just take, the customer that pays you the most feedback and develop the product specifically for them?
Yeah, first of all, you can never master that, meaning that problem kind of is the challenge of not just the product side of a growing company, but really the entire strategy of the company. Who do we sell to? What are we selling? How quickly do we expand? I tend to think of it as like a bottoms, kind of like a top down and a bottom up, where there's a bottom up process, which is where you talk to lots of customers, you get a lot of feedback. You should have some mechanism to track it. It's probably a big spreadsheet, or like for us, it was a big Notion database, Airtable database. So to actually, and of course now there's a ton of AI tools that'll go through your meeting notes and go through your gongs and everything and get you and kind of gather a lot of that data for you. I think companies should put the data platform in place because it keeps them honest. It lets you answer questions like, how many customers have really asked this? What is the cost or kind of the benefits of doing a certain feature? Is this just like the CEO talked to one customer and they heard it and they try to put it at the top of the list? Or is this something that's truly bubbled up across the customer base? So I do think there's a data component, but I think a lot of it is kind of more art than science. I think there's a top down, which is, again, the stuff we were just talking about. Who is our ideal customer? What markets do we sell to? What's the next couple markets we're going to go after? Are these prospects we're hearing from in that market? Do they have the problems we're trying to solve? Is it in line with our company strategy? So I think the bottom up gives you kind of a list of possible things you could do. The top down, you can answer the question, okay, is this truly aligned with the company we want to build? Or is this really just not wanting to say no to a customer or being desperate to make the quarter? So we're going to say yes to the feature that the big enterprise deal has. Then you have to kind of put those two together, figure out who in the company makes those decisions, which should largely be driven out of product management. I'm a huge fan of strong product management in a company because that's the team that's both responsible for the data side as well as the decision-making side. But if it's a big product investment, then there is a lot of kind of executive team review all the way up to CEO review. Then you get into the questions of when do you override kind of the founder mode discussion that everybody's having right now, versus when do you kind of let the data speak for itself and trust the teams to make those decisions. And that all comes out in kind of how you plan the company, the culture you have, how open you are around sharing this kind of information. So I'd say it's more art than science, but there are it can be done well, and but it has to be quarterbacked, I think, almost always by a strong product management team.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned the founder mode thing. Where have you seen what are the common use cases for people to step in, right? Because like a lot of the founder mode conversation that happens is like it's like more around the almost the HR philosophy of it all, which is like, oh, like you need to have like a strong centrally willed presence, whatever, like trying to decide things. But there isn't actually like a lot of talk as to the why for it, where it's like why does this work for Airbnb? Well, why did this work for Airbnb? Or at what points is it appropriate versus not? Like, what does that look like? Like, what is the most common reason for sort of a senior leader or founder to step in and say, actually, like, I'm going to take the reins of the strategy and make some executive calls, even though like it's maybe a little bit more based on gut than it is on data.
First of all, I wrote a piece on founder mode in my Substack, joining the 100 other pieces that have been written. But I will give you kind of, I think, the highlights of it, which there's a theoretical framework for management, which is you hire a great head of product, a great head of sales, a great head of marketing, great CFO. Then you just all agree on the goals and objectives. You check in with them, you do your one-on-ones, you kind of let stuff unfold as it unfolds. That's kind of the theoretical, kind of like the ideal, like that's kind of the what we're there's theory and reality. I think the theory of running a company is you get great people in each role, great head of sales, great head of marketing, great CFO, great head of product, empower them, check in with them, make sure everybody's working well together, collaborate on the goals, then you trust them to do the right thing. And I still think that obviously it never is that perfect, but I still think that's kind of you should almost still always treat that as the true north for what you're trying to build, especially if you're high growth and you're scaling. So then there's the question of when do you, and this isn't just at the CEO level, this happens at the VP level, director level. It's always a dilemma when you're in management, which is when do you go in and either give a strong opinion on something or even override a decision? And Paul Graham talked about this a little bit in his piece, where he was talking about kind of the HR way to run a company, which is you build an org chart, you get a great head of sales, head of marketing, CFO. They hire managers. You write down goals and objectives. You delegate. You empower. You get out of the way. Now, I think that's still the true north in terms of if you really want to scale. That's the starting point. That's what you want to get toward. Founder mode is all about knowing when do you have to make exceptions to that? When do you have to go in and make a decision, give input on a decision, override? And everybody who's ever worked at a high growth startup knows there's just almost daily situations where a founder or even a senior person at the company has to go in and say, we can't completely run the company that way.
Yeah, a lot of times what ends up, I think the thing that we've seen the most often is, especially when you're young, if people actually use your product, they constantly ask you for more and more and more and more, right? Like, oh, like you can do problem A. Can you also do problem A.5, which is like loosely related to problem A? Can you add that to your roadmap? And the temptation basically is that if all of these teams are incredibly siloed and they don't talk to each other, then the product roadmap becomes, okay, build the thing they asked for us first, then second, then third, then fourth, and fifth. And oftentimes, honestly, it's not even a founder. It's just somebody who has like a good understanding of the general lay of the land can come in and say, actually, the thing that we should really build is secret item number 6 that will give us 1 through 4 for free and make it really easy for us to like actually tack on 5.
I like the way you asked that because I think that's an example of where founder mode helps a company make a better decision, but in a way that's maybe not completely intuitive. Because for example, if you let those kind of decisions bubble up from below, the product people don't want to say no to sales. Sales has deals they want to close. The engineers have a bunch of opinions on the right way to do things. And people aren't sure who's going to make a decision, and people don't always know exactly what criteria or how to measure a decision like that. But if you have strong leaders in the company, and I think founder mode is really just kind of another way to say you have good leaders, which could be a founder. It could even be your head of product, your CTO, somebody who kind of who's able to lead those teams. They're the ones who are able to say, not, hey, everybody work harder, do all 5 of those features. I'm going to do the like Steve Jobs, set an unreasonable deadline, inspire people to achieve the impossible. That's not founder mode. I think founder mode is saying, we're not going to do 4 of those 5 because that is not in line with who we want to sell to, the company we build, our vision on the market. So it's founder mode. Often you're giving your team cover to say no. You're giving your team guidance on how to say yes, how to kind of look at those decisions. And when you have those conversations, I think it's always an opportunity to say, okay, we have a vision for the company as well as an operating plan to get there. When you see confusion, when you see, for example, the team that maybe was going to go down the road of building a bunch of features that really aren't in line with who you're selling to, it's also a chance to like debug. It's a chance to say, are we not sharing the vision? Does everybody not understand the kind of companies, the kind of companies we're trying to sell to? Does the sales team think their role is to sell to anybody who will make the number, who can help them make the number? If so, let's go and solve that problem as opposed to that problem then kind of leaking into other parts of the company. So founder mode is both being willing to jump in when you see those things and fix them, but it's also taking a step back and saying, how did we get here? How do we keep that from happening again? And again, how do we get closer to that ideal of everybody in the company being empowered to drive things? And founder mode is only for the exceptions.
I like that a lot because something we've talked about a little bit. Obviously we are fans of data and data backed decision making. But I think that there's, the phrase data driven has always kind of irked me a little bit because it sounds almost passive of like, hey, I'm taking my hands off the wheel. Like, it's like instead of Jesus take the wheel, it's data take the wheel. Like, just guide us somewhere. You got this. And, you use the phrase art more than science. And I think more and more I'm starting to really believe like the difference maker for these businesses is the art, the gut feel of the CEO or the leadership team, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like it seems like if everything was just a matter of data, then it should be a completely even playing field, and it's just whoever can amass the most data and cut through it will win. And that's not what you see. You see people who can, to your point, you've had 5 wins in your last 5 companies, right? That is different than just following data. Like I have failed a lot of times, so there's got to be a difference.
Yeah, and let me say, I would only call 4 out of the 5 wins. And the one that was a failure is where I didn't do all the stuff we just talked about how you're supposed to do. And I almost like knew I wasn't doing them, but still always had steps along the way for why kind of I actually was or thought I was. And that's a whole other discussion we can go down. But it all came back to, are you really having honest conversations with customers? Or are you really just trying to get them to agree with your point of view on the market? And the happy ears thing where you're looking for validation as opposed to truly trying to understand.
Okay, so shifting a little bit, you talked in your intro, maybe it was before we started recording, about how you're really interested in kind of the connection between product and go to market, and we've talked a little bit about that initial bit of validating your idea or the discovery and then the validation piece. What is sort of the next step that companies should be looking for on that go to market side?
I tend to look at these things in terms of the team, in terms of the people who are involved. And I think that premature scale is kind of the root of almost all startup evil in my mind, where you are trying to skip steps or you are trying to um, build a small version of a big company where you're starting to add people, get departmental, get siloed. And it's funny, a lot of people, when they hear premature scale, they think that, oh, premature scale is the company that raised $20 million and hired 100 people. And like, that's not me. I'm a 3-person startup with a co-founder and a developer. We're not going to scale prematurely. But I have met companies with 1 employee who are premature scaling. Because premature scaling is about skipping steps. It's about deciding this problem is solved and moving on to the next problem where you haven't really solved the first problem. And I think what this usually looks like in practice is you kind of declare victory on the product market fit question. Maybe you get one or two customers, or you get some positive feedback. So you think your goal is now build out the product, hire some people to sell it, hire a marketing team to market it. You grow from, say maybe 3 people to 10 people, something like that. And what happens is you immediately start acting as multiple teams, meaning the product team has a point of view of what they're building, and the sales and marketing team has a point of view of what they're selling. Then you start to see it diverge where the roadmap doesn't match what the sales and marketing team is hearing from customers. You have the exact problem we just talked about, which is you get a bunch of customer feedback and people don't really know how to process it or what things to prioritize. And in the worst case, you can even start to get politics and silos, which is hilarious that like a 10-person company can get siloed, but I've seen it happen all the time. It's super, super common. And I think the answer is usually, first of all, think of the company as one team. Don't think of it as a product team, sales team, marketing team, executive team. Think of it as a whole set of people who are all working together on one problem, which is really how do we get customers to buy and use and get success out of a product that we're selling to them that they love, which sounds easy, but super hard. Most companies never actually get there. And I think the way you do it is you have a shared set of plans across the company. For example, at an early stage company, that's usually get 5 happy, successful paying customers, get 10 customers. It's usually sounds like a go-to-market goal, but it's really an overall company goal, which goes all the way from product to marketing to go-to-market. And then and then the executive team, kind of or the founders, their role is really what we just talked about a minute ago with founder mode, which is their job is not to sit back and let the feature requests pile up on the product side, then have a sales team, which is asking, why are we doing or not doing various things? It's really to sit down with the team. It might even be daily. I mean, I've seen the small companies where they have a daily stand-up to talk about these things. So really keep reminding people, this is who we're selling to. Our goal collectively is to get some customers signed, which means product team is sitting in on customer calls. The product team is sitting in on getting those first few customers implemented. The sales and marketing team are intimately involved with what's being built, understanding what's coming out, understanding why it's being built. So it's lots of communication. There's lots of shared plans across departments. It's not having a split between the product side of the company and the go-to-market side of the company. And I've seen that split develop almost from day one. I've even seen that split develop in a 2-person company with the go-to-market co-founder and a product co-founder.
I was just saying, it makes sense in both ways. Like I've absolutely seen it, but like conceptually, you would think it'd be like, hey, we have X number of things that need to be done. So let's divide and conquer, right? Like that's what we always get taught is like many hands make light work. And so like, hey, I'll take these 2. I have more background in this. You take those 2. We'll meet in the middle. Obviously, we both know what we're trying to build. But then, yeah, you can start to see what that friction looks like. That is interesting.
My side note on this too is that like you and I talked a lot. Well, a little. Like we didn't have a super long conversation, but the conversation we had last Friday, we talked about like why like we like in person, right? Like the in-person versus remote thing. And I think you said the advice that you give people coming out of college is like find something in person. I think that this is also incredibly important for startups because communication is weirdly like the hardest thing. Like I can't find like I'm having this great conversation with you right now, but then I have like 4 other back-to-backs after this. And like the thing that keeps going through my mind is I have to tell my co-founder all the cool things that we talked about during this conversation. But by the end of the day, there's this like group of like 5 other things. And if you just completely treat folks in a silo, you end up running into that problem. The other thing that's really, really tough is most people and the corporate world sort of incentivizes us to get good at one thing, right? Like a lot of founders are these like really spiky people that are sort of very, very good at 2 verticals. Like they can usually apply, I don't know, you're maybe a good example of this, right? Like applying product and engineering to customer support, right? Like thinking about an existing problem in a different way. It's very hard to find those people. And so most founding teams, one founder does generally tend to go towards one direction and one generally tends to go the other. And if you don't find that time to collaborate, you end up just kind of spinning your wheels and not realizing that you're.
I've been really lucky in that I have been the technical co-founder of or been on the technical side at almost all my companies. I've been a CEO once and then been tech co-founder or first kind of senior tech hire 4 times. And 2 of those companies were with Joseph Antonelli, who was my co-founder at Gladly. He's very strong. He was the CEO of both those companies. He's extremely strong as a CEO, fundraising, go to market, business development, market, like great with customers. And I'm a little stronger on um, the operational side, customer success, customer support, engineering, product management. But we have an overlap where we both have a strong point of view, first of all, on people and culture and building a great team and communication, transparency. And we share a lot in terms of just thinking about product, about how to build a great product. Customers love it, really well designed. So you have to work with people who are different and have different skill sets. And like you said, there is a point where you say, let's divide and conquer and go off and shoot down our backlogs. But there has to be constant meeting in the middle about what are the priorities, what are we working on, what are the conflicts that have come up that we have to resolve. Then as you get to 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, that will get harder because there's more people to get into the room and more things to resolve. Um, and often it just comes down to lots of communication, lots of meeting time. It often comes down to, I think it is easier when you're in person, although if you devote the time, you certainly can do some of this remote. I think it often also means, back to the founder mode conversation, often conflict pops up. Customer A wants this, customer B wants this. You know, Sales needs to make their number, but there's a couple prospects that are out of our ICP. And being willing to stand up in front of the company or in front of your team almost daily and saying, hey, I'm sorry to disappoint this person, but we're not going to go after that deal. Or I'm sorry to have to say no to this, but we're going to not build that feature so we can instead build that feature. I think the biggest mistakes that most leaders make is they kind of say yes to all of it, or they're kind of wishy-washy on all of it. So the team walks away saying, did we just agree to sell to all those customers? Did we just agree to try to build all those features? So it's not enough to communicate all the time. You have to constantly break ties and say no. And again, it's back to the founder mode thing. You have to have somebody who's willing to do that, even knowing that every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And you might even be disappointing someone on your team who really wanted to build that feature or try to win that deal.
Michael, that was awesome. Unfortunately, because of our YouTube algorithm time limits, I think we're gonna have to definitely find time for an episode 2 of this. Had a ton of fun. Before we jump off, is there anything that you want to? I know you have a Substack. Give us the name again. And we'll drop the link in our show notes so people can read more of your writing. But if there's other things you want to pub or anything else that you want to tell our listeners, let's do that before we wrap up.
Working with a lot of early stage startups the last few months, because I'm really launching a career as a startup coach, as an executive coach for later stage companies, as well as I can do a few that are kind of in that trying to get the product market fit kind of a process that we've been talking about. I'm writing about a lot of this at my Substack, which is nextfounder.co, which we'll put in the notes. And I'm always happy. Like, I love meeting startups. I will talk to any startup, once or twice. I just love to hear what people are working on. I love to collect material and stories for my writing. And I just kind of geek out on this stuff, which is why we're here. I do, like I said earlier, even though every single company is different, the teams are different. That's what's great about what we're doing. There tend to be a set of patterns or a set of challenges, opportunities that almost everybody hits along the way. We really hit a lot of them here kind of at the high level, like the really broad places that tend to cause challenges. And if we have a chance to follow up, I'd love to go a little deeper into how some tools and tactics you can actually use to break through some of these things. But it is doable, and plenty of other people have done it, and there are ways to get to the other side.
I will personally vouch for this. I've again been reading you for a while. It took me a lot of time to I cold message people on LinkedIn basically for a living, and it still took me like a couple months to actually reach out and I was like, oh, I don't want to bother him. Like it was, but yeah, we had such a great conversation. Even from the one chat we had, I learned a ton. Yeah, can definitely just vouch for how great it is to talk to you. But yeah, no, thanks so much for coming on, and we enjoyed this a ton.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. Looking forward to doing it again.